Imani Johnson didn't plan to file a complaint on a Tuesday. She planned to survive Tuesday, finish the quarterly reconciliation, and make it home in time to help her little brother with his math homework, like she'd promised. But by 3:17 p.m., after the third joke in a week, and the seventh time her manager spoke over her in a meeting as if she hadn't spent 2 nights building the report everyone was using, she found herself standing outside Human Resources with her badge still clipped to her blazer, palms sweating around her phone like it might fly away. The HR door at Halbert and Wren Consulting was the same as every other door on the 6th floor. Frosted glass, a neat metal plaque, and a handle that always felt colder than expected. Imani took one breath and went in. The office smelled like lemon cleaner and printer toner. A poster on the wall read, "We value respect," but it looked like it had been laminated years ago and forgotten. Behind a desk sat Cheryl Vance, the HR generalist. White, mid-40s, hair pulled into a smooth bun, a mug that said, "Ask me about our culture," sitting beside her keyboard. Cheryl looked up with the expression of someone being interrupted in the middle of a task she considered more important than whatever was about to happen. "Hi," Imani began, keeping her voice even. "Do you have a few minutes?" Cheryl's eyes flicked to the clock, then back. "Sure, but make it quick. We're slammed." Imani nodded and sat in the chair across from her. She'd rehearsed this. Facts, dates, words used, witnesses. She had notes on her phone because she'd learned, painfully, that when you described mistreatment without details, it got labelled as miscommunication. When you brought details, you got labelled as sensitive. Either way, you were the problem unless you were very, very careful. "I'd like to make a formal complaint," Imani said, "about my manager, Scott Leland." Cheryl's eyebrows lifted and something like amusement passed through her face. "Scott?" she repeated, as if the name itself was a punchline. "Okay, what did he do exactly?" Imani kept her gaze steady. "He's been making comments about how I speak. He calls it cute when I'm presenting, says I'm surprisingly articulate. He's also repeatedly assigning me work outside my role and then taking credit for it in meetings. And last Friday, he joked that I was the diversity hire that actually works." Cheryl stared for a beat, then let out a short laugh. Not loud, not cruel in the obvious way. The kind of laugh people use to signal they weren't taking you seriously while giving themselves plausible deniability if you reacted. "Oh my God," Cheryl said, still smiling. "That sounds like Scott. He's old school. He doesn't mean anything by it." Imani's stomach tightened. "It matters that he says it. It's affecting my work environment." Cheryl leaned back and folded her arms. "Imani, you're one of our top performers. You're clearly doing fine." Imani didn't blink. "Being good at my job doesn't mean I should tolerate racist comments." Cheryl's smile faltered for half a second, then returned in a more careful shape. Okay, let's not jump to labels. Racist is a big word." Imani felt heat rise behind her eyes, but she kept her tone controlled. "What would you call diversity hire as a joke?" Cheryl shrugged as if this were a debate about office snacks. "A bad joke. Look, I can have a conversation with him, but filing something formal is heavy. It follows him. It creates tension." "It already created tension," Imani said. "For me." Cheryl leaned forward, lowering her voice as if sharing advice. "If you make this formal, you're going to have to prove it. Do you have witnesses, emails, recordings? Because otherwise it becomes he said she said, and those rarely go anywhere." Imani's fingers tightened around her phone. "So the expectation is I should just accept it unless I can build a case like I'm in court." Cheryl laughed again, softer. "I'm just telling you how it works." Imani stared at her, hearing the words clearly now. Not how it should work. How it works here. She stood up slowly. "I want to file it," she said. Cheryl sighed dramatically and pulled a form from a drawer. "Fine, fill this out. But honestly, Scott is a revenue driver. Leadership loves him. I'm just trying to protect you from disappointment. Imani took the form, scanned it quickly, and felt her jaw tighten again. It wasn't a complaint form. It was a workplace communication concern form, full of language about misunderstandings, tone, interpersonal friction, everything except harassment and discrimination. It framed the problem like a mutual conflict. "I'm not filling this out," Imani said. Cheryl looked up sharply. "Excuse me? This isn't a discrimination complaint form," Imani replied. "This reclassifies what I'm reporting." Cheryl's eyes narrowed. "It's the process we use." Imani set the paper back on the desk. "Then your process is designed to minimize complaints." Cheryl's cheeks flushed. "That's not fair." Imani's voice stayed calm. "It's accurate." Cheryl leaned back again, lips pressed tight. "So what do you want me to do, Imani?" Imani took a breath. "I want the right form. I want an investigation. And I want it documented that I requested this today." Cheryl stared at her for a long moment, then gave a thin smile. "I'll see what I can do." Imani walked out of HR with her heart pounding, not because she'd said something dramatic, but because she'd finally said it out loud. This is happening, and it's not okay. She returned to her desk, tried to focus, tried to pretend the office air didn't feel different now, but by the end of the day, she had an email waiting in her inbox from Cheryl. Subject: Quick Chat Recap. The email was 2 lines. "Thanks for stopping by. As discussed, your concern appears to involve communication style and perception. I can facilitate a conversation with Scott if desired." Imani stared at it until the words blurred. Communication style and perception. Like she'd come in to complain about someone chewing loudly. Like diversity hire was a misunderstanding of tone. That night, she sat at her kitchen table and wrote another set of notes, this time not just about Scott's comments, but about HR's response. Dates, wording, the laugh, the refusal to categorize it properly. She saved everything. Then, exhausted and shaky with a kind of anger that felt more like grief, she opened a job board. 2 weeks later, she had an offer from a competitor. Better salary, better title, remote flexibility. She should have felt only relief. Instead, she felt a bitter sadness she couldn't fully explain. She liked her work. She liked some of her colleagues. She'd wanted to build here, but she knew what staying would cost, and she was tired of paying. When she submitted her resignation, Scott called her within 5 minutes. "What's this?" he asked, too bright, too casual. "You leaving us?" "I'm moving on," Imani said. Scott chuckled. "Come on, is this about that little thing you tried to stir up with HR? You know Cheryl told me you were feeling sensitive." Imani's throat went cold. HR had told him. Not the details, maybe, but enough. Enough to warn him. Enough to label her. "It's about my future," she said evenly. Scott sighed. "Well, good luck. You'll find other places aren't so accommodating." She ended the call with her hands trembling. 2 days later, an email arrived from Cheryl. Subject: Exit interview invitation. "We'd like to schedule your exit interview. Please choose a time." Imani almost deleted it. Exit interviews at Halberd and Wren were known as performance theatre. HR pretending to care, employees smiling through it, nothing changing. But something in her snapped into clarity. They'd laughed when she tried to report. They'd minimized it. They'd warned her it would be he said, she said, fine. She would give them something that wasn't. She clicked the scheduling link and chose Friday at 10 a.m. Then she opened her folder of saved evidence. Over the last month, she'd collected what she could without violating policies. Emails where Scott had forwarded her work to leadership as if it were his. Meeting invites where she'd been excluded from calls about projects she'd built. A chat message from a colleague, Hannah, white, junior analyst, saying, "I hate how he talks to you in meetings." She also had the quick chat recap email from Cheryl that reclassified her complaint. And she had her timeline written in careful, unemotional language. Friday arrived. The exit interview was held in a small conference room with a speakerphone in the center and a water pitcher that looked like it had been filled hours ago. Cheryl entered first, smiling too widely, then a second person followed. Mark Davenport, white, early 50s, HR director, the kind of man who spoke in smooth phrases and expected gratitude for his attention. "Imani," Mark said warmly, "we're sorry to see you go. We want to learn from your experience." Cheryl sat beside him, not looking at Imani directly. Imani folded her hands on the table. "Okay." Mark clicked a pen. "So, what led you to seek another opportunity?" Imani held his gaze. "I tried to report discriminatory behavior by my manager. HR dismissed it." Cheryl's head snapped up. Mark's smile tightened. "I see," Mark said carefully. "Can you elaborate?" Imani pulled out a printed packet, 3 pages, stapled. She slid one copy toward Mark and one toward Cheryl. "This is a timeline. Dates, examples, and relevant emails." Cheryl's face went pale. Mark adjusted his glasses and began reading. The room went quiet except for the faint sound of paper shifting as he turned the first page. Imani watched his expression change as he reached the section quoting Scott's words. "Diversity hire that actually works." Surprisingly articulate. "Say it again. I like how you pronounce that." Then the section describing HR's reaction, including Cheryl's email calling it communication style and perception. Mark looked up slowly. "Cheryl," he said. Cheryl's mouth opened, then closed. I was trying to de-escalate." Mark didn't smile. By reframing a discrimination report as a communication concern? Cheryl's eyes flicked to Imani, then away. "We didn't have witnesses." Imani's voice remained calm. "You didn't ask for them. You laughed." The word landed like a stone. Mark looked back at Imani. "Did you have witnesses?" Imani nodded. "Yes. I have names of employees who were present during comments, and I have one written statement. I also have email evidence of work credit issues, which supports retaliation after the complaint attempt." Mark's posture shifted. "Retaliation?" Imani glanced at Cheryl. "My manager referenced my complaint attempt after I resigned. He said HR told him I was sensitive." Cheryl's face flushed. "I never said that." Imani didn't argue. She simply looked at Mark. "That's what he said to me." Mark exhaled slowly. "Thank you for bringing this forward." Cheryl's voice rose slightly, defensive now. "Exit interviews aren't investigations." Mark turned to her. "They can initiate them." The room went still. Mark faced Imani again, tone now entirely different. Less polished, more serious. "I want to apologize for how this was handled. I can't undo what you experienced, but I can take action on what you've documented. Would you be willing to forward the supporting emails to me directly?" Imani nodded. "Yes." Mark added, "I also want to ask whether you'd consider delaying your departure while we address this." Imani didn't hesitate. "No." Mark nodded, accepting it. "Understood." When Imani left the conference room, she felt lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because she'd said it clearly, with proof. Heavier because she knew how many people never got the chance, or the energy, to assemble proof just to be believed. 3 days later, an email arrived from Mark. It was short, direct, and the first HR email she'd ever received from Halberd and Wren that didn't feel like a shield. "We have initiated a formal investigation based on your documentation. We have also retained your complaint attempt as a protected report. Thank you." Then, a week after that, another message appeared. This one wasn't vague. "Scott Leland has been removed from managerial duties pending outcome. Mandatory training and policy review are being implemented for HR intake procedures. Cheryl Vance will not be handling discrimination reports going forward." Imani stared at her phone for a long time. It wasn't justice in the movie sense. It didn't erase anything. It didn't give her back the weeks of sleeplessness or the quiet humiliation of being laughed at in HR. but it was something she'd rarely seen happen in real time. A system admitting it had failed and then changing because it was forced to look at a record it couldn't laugh away. On her last day, a few colleagues stopped by her desk with hugs and awkward smiles. Hannah, the junior analyst, whispered, "I'm glad you did it. I was scared." Another coworker murmured, "He's been like that forever. You're the first person they actually listened to." Imani didn't feel proud. She felt tired. But she also felt a small, steady sense of certainty. She hadn't been wrong to demand to be treated like a human being. 2 months into her new job, her new manager, a black woman named Renee, asked her in a one-on-one, "How do you like to be supported?" Imani blinked at the question, surprised by its simplicity. "By being listened to," she said. Renee nodded, like that made perfect sense. Done. One afternoon, an unfamiliar number called Imani's phone. It was Mark from her old company. His voice sounded different, less corporate, more careful. "I wanted you to know the investigation concluded," he said. "Scott's employment has been terminated. We also revised our complaint intake workflow. Every report now triggers a documented classification review with a second HR sign-off. No one person can reframe it alone." Imani closed her eyes briefly. "Good. And," he added, "we issued a formal apology letter to you. I know you're not coming back. I just wanted you to have it." Imani thanked him and ended the call. Later, she printed the apology letter, not because she needed it to feel validated, but because she wanted something tangible that proved what she already knew. The problem had never been her sensitivity. The problem had been their convenience. She put the letter in a folder with her old notes and labelled it, simply, Receipts. Then she went back to her life, work that respected her, evenings that didn't feel like recovery from someone else's ego, and a quiet understanding that her complaint didn't disappear just because someone laughed. It waited, it gathered evidence. And when the exit interview was requested, the story stopped belonging to the people who thought they could rewrite it. Imani tried to act like Cheryl's email didn't bother her, because that's what you did at Halberd and Wren. You swallowed the insult, you renamed the disrespect as feedback, you smiled through the part where your dignity got treated like an optional benefit. She printed the quick chat recap anyway and slid it into a folder at home, the same way her mother used to keep important papers in a shoebox under the bed, quietly, like she already knew a day would come when someone would pretend they never said what they said. The next morning, Imani walked into the office with her usual discipline. Hair neat, laptop charged, schedule already mapped out. She sat at her desk and opened the reconciliation file she'd been building for weeks. It was her work, her structure, her formulas, her notes. She had built it to be bulletproof because she'd learned early that when you're the only black woman in the room, your work had to survive not just scrutiny, but the desire to find something wrong with you. At 9:30 a.m., Scott Leland called a quick sync for the finance stream. He always called it quick. It never was. It was usually a stage. Imani joined the conference room with her laptop and sat along the wall while Scott stood near the screen like he owned the air. He started the meeting with his usual charm, smiling at the right people, making a joke that landed because it wasn't at anyone's expense, until it was. "All right," Scott said, clapping his hands once. "We've got a clean story this quarter. I pulled some numbers together." Imani's eyes flicked to the slide. The layout looked familiar. Too familiar. The font sizing, the conditional formatting colors, the exact way the variance table was aligned. It was her workbook exported into a deck. Scott clicked to the next slide. "The reconciliation logic is solid," he continued. "I kept it simple so even non-finance folks can follow." Imani sat very still. Her throat tightened, but her face didn't change. She had been through this before. A man explaining your work as if he invented it, simplifying it like your intelligence was an accessory he could borrow for the meeting. A director asked, "Scott, how long did it take you to get this organized?" Scott laughed lightly. "Oh, you know, I have my ways." Imani's fingers went cold on her keyboard. She didn't interrupt. She didn't call him out in front of everyone. She waited, the way she always waited, because she understood how quickly a black woman became aggressive for doing what other people called assertive. When the meeting ended, she caught Scott by the door. "Hey," she said, voice steady. "Those slides are from my workbook." Scott's smile didn't disappear, but it changed shape. "Yeah," he said, "I cleaned them up." "You used my exact tables," she replied, "and you didn't credit me." Scott leaned closer as people filtered past them. "Imani," he said, low and almost affectionate, "don't make it weird. The client doesn't care who built the table, they care that it's right." "I care," she said. Scott's eyes narrowed just slightly. "There it is," he said, like he'd been waiting for her to prove something. "This is what I told Cheryl. You take things personally." Imani's stomach dropped. The words confirmed what she'd feared the moment Scott mentioned sensitive. HR hadn't protected her. They'd briefed him on the vibe, the framing, the narrative that would make her look unreasonable before she even spoke. "I'm asking for basic professional credit," she said. Scott shrugged. "Then put your name on it next time." "It had my name," Imani replied, voice quiet but sharp. "In the file properties, in the version history." Scott smiled again, dismissive now. "Anyway, I need you on something else. New request just came in. I want you to redo the variance analysis by tomorrow morning, but don't use your usual style. It's too detailed." Imani stared at him. "Too detailed?" Scott waved his hand. "It overwhelms people." It wasn't about the detail. It was about control. He was rewriting the rules around her work, not because it needed rewriting, but because he needed her to remember he could. Imani returned to her desk and opened the task list. The new assignment wasn't in her queue. It wasn't in the project tracker. It was a verbal request, delivered in a hallway where no one could verify it later. She opened an email and wrote one sentence. "Hi Scott, confirming you'd like a revised variance analysis by tomorrow morning with simplified formatting, per your request." She hit send and stared at the screen, waiting for the reply. If he accepted it, it became a record. If he didn't, that was a record too. He didn't reply. He never replied when documentation would limit his ability to rewrite the story later. Over the next week, the shifts became sharper. Scott stopped inviting Imani to meetings where her projects were discussed. She'd find out decisions had been made after the fact, her name attached to tasks she'd never agreed to, timelines shortened without warning. When she asked questions, Scott acted like she was being difficult, like clarity was a personality flaw. One afternoon, while Imani was presenting an update to a cross-functional group, Scott interrupted her mid-sentence. "No, not that," he said, laughing lightly. "Say it differently." Imani paused. "What part would you like clarified?" Scott smirked. "Just slow down. Sometimes your phrasing is a little..." He tilted his head, searching for a word he could pretend wasn't loaded. "Urban." A couple of people laughed quickly, like they were trying to keep the room comfortable. Imani felt the sting under her ribs, hot and immediate. She looked around the room. No one met her eyes. Someone took a sip of water. Someone typed notes like this was normal. Imani finished the presentation anyway, voice steady, hands controlled. When it ended, she walked straight back to her desk and opened her notes. Date, time, witnesses present, exact wording, urban. She didn't embellish it. She didn't editorialize. She just wrote it down. That evening, Hannah, the junior analyst, messaged her in the company chat. "Hey, are you okay?" Imani stared at the message for a long moment before answering. "I'm fine," Hannah replied almost immediately. "I hate how he talks to you in meetings. It's not okay." Imani's chest tightened again, this time in a different way. Not relief, exactly, but the strange loneliness of realizing that people noticed and still stayed quiet. "Thank you," Imani typed. "I'm documenting everything." Hannah hesitated, then sent, If you ever need me to say what I saw, I will. Imani took a screenshot and saved it to her personal folder. Not because she wanted to drag Hannah into it, but because she'd already learned that when a system demanded proof, it never asked the right person to provide it. It asked the person being harmed to carry it alone. A few days later, Imani tried HR again. Not to plead, to formally follow up. She emailed Cheryl with the subject line, "Follow up, request for proper complaint classification." She attached Cheryl's own recap email and wrote, "I am reiterating that my report involves discriminatory comments and retaliation concerns, not communication style. Please confirm next steps for a formal investigation." Cheryl replied the next morning with one sentence, "We can schedule mediation if you'd like." Mediation. Like Imani and Scott were two equal parties in a disagreement about whose turn it was to use the conference room, not a manager with power and a black woman being targeted for daring to name what he was doing. Imani forwarded the thread to her personal email using the permitted export function for work records, then saved it. Every mediation offer, every refusal to classify correctly, every delay became part of the story. The pressure started seeping into her body. Headaches at night, jaw clenched in her sleep, a tightness in her chest whenever her phone buzzed with a calendar invite from Scott. She started double-checking her words in emails 3 times before hitting send, not because she was uncertain, but because she was tired of being framed as the problem. And then, one Friday, Scott called her into his office. He didn't ask her to sit. He stood behind his desk with the posture of someone about to do something helpful. "Imani," he said, "I've been thinking about your attitude lately." Imani kept her face neutral. "My attitude?" Scott nodded. "You're tense, defensive. It's like you're looking for offenses." Imani's hands curled slightly. "I'm responding to the environment." Scott smiled, the kind of smile that pretended to be patient. "This is a high-performance place. If you can't handle direct feedback—" "This isn't feedback," Imani said quietly. "It's disrespect." Scott's eyes hardened. "There it is again," he said. "See? This is why it's hard to work with you sometimes." Imani felt the trap close around the sentence. He was building a record of her difficulty, something he could later point to as justification if she escalated. She realized, with a cold clarity, that her complaint attempt had not triggered accountability. It had triggered strategy. When she returned to her desk, she opened her job board again. This time, she didn't browse. She applied, carefully, quietly, with the same precision she used for financial reports. Within 2 weeks, she had interviews. In those interviews, people asked her what she wanted to build, what she was proud of, how she approached teamwork. No one asked if she was too detailed. No one commented on her voice. No one smirked when she spoke. She could feel her body unclench in real time. The offer arrived on a Wednesday afternoon. Higher salary. Better title. A manager known for developing talent. Flexible schedule. It wasn't a miracle. It was simply a place that sounded like it wouldn't cost her dignity as a fee for entry. Imani accepted the offer, then sat at her desk staring at her email draft for resignation. Her hands shook slightly as she typed her 2-week notice. Not because she wasn't sure, but because leaving meant acknowledging she'd done everything right and still couldn't make them treat her right. She sent it. 5 minutes later, Scott called. Bright voice, false friendliness, then the line that confirmed everything. "Cheryl said you were feeling sensitive." After that call, Imani didn't cry. She didn't scream. She opened her notes and wrote one more entry. Date, time. Scott referenced HR disclosure. Exact words. Sensitive. She stared at the page until the anger settled into something cleaner, sharper. If they wanted a story where she was the problem, she was done participating in it. 2 days later, the exit interview request came in, and for the first time since she'd walked into HR weeks ago, Imani felt something like control return to her hands. Not because she believed they cared now, but because she understood what an exit interview really was in a company like this. The moment they tried to seal the narrative, to close the folder, to file her away as another person who wasn't a culture fit. Only this time, she wasn't leaving quietly. This time, she was leaving with documentation.